In the previous episode, we reached a decisive turning point in the history of the Aegean world. The great island civilizations of the Minoans and the Cyclades collapsed, victims both of their own structural limitations and of the rise of an increasingly hostile and belligerent world. In this vacuum, a new power emerged, the Mycenaean civilization. Originating from the Greek mainland, it gradually established itself as the dominant warrior power of its time, determined to extend its influence across both land and sea, and to assert control over the eastern Mediterranean. But how did this supremacy actually take shape in concrete terms? What strategies did the Mycenaeans adopt to establish their authority? And above all, how did the surrounding peoples respond? These are the questions we will attempt to answer in this episode, as we explore the heart of this expansionist movement. Welcome to the Odyssey of Organizations. So let's begin by breaking the silence. The first phase of Mycenaean expansion remains rather obscure today, particularly regarding what actually took place on the Greek mainland itself. The limited evidence we have comes mainly from traces found across the Aegean Sea, especially on the island of Crete. The Mycenaeans appear to have settled in Knossos, the last Minoan palace still standing after the invasion, and they seem to have exercised authority over the entire island. But what kind of domination was this exactly? Was it direct rule imposed by an organized state, or rather a takeover by mercenaries, or perhaps even an ambiguous alliance? Nothing is certain. However, several clues suggest that this control was simultaneously political, administrative, and cultural. On the political level, the presence of a throne room at Knossos, built according to Minoan architectural standards, is a strong indicator. It is more than a detail, more than a seat. It represents a symbolic seizure of the very nerve center of Minoan power. This is all the more significant because government was then reorganized in a more centralized way across the island, through the palatial system, where each palace managed a region. On the administrative side, the arrival of the Mycenaeans also marked the end of the monopoly of the writing system known as Linear A. We now also find tablets written in Linear B, a version of Linear A adapted to the Greek language. This is evidence of Mycenaean control extending into the administration itself, as well as a clear intention towards economic and commercial dominance. Finally, on the cultural level, the signs of their presence are equally clear. Aesthetic expression changed dramatically. Frescoes, jewelry, and everyday objects became more austere, in contrast with the refined sensitivity and sacred symbolism of Minoan culture. If you followed our series on the Aegean world, you will remember the importance given to nature, femininity, and the sacred. Here, the contrast is striking. Nature is no longer venerated, but dominated. No longer the goddess, but the warrior stands at the center, as seen in Mycenaean tombs discovered in Crete from this period. What is particularly fascinating is that some of these changes had already begun earlier. For example, iconography that is less favorable to women, or Linear B, which initially appears to have been used to facilitate trade between the two civilizations. This suggests a discrete but very real underlying influence. We can also observe the emergence of a mixed elite, both Cretan and Mycenaean. This fusion did not produce a simple Mycenaean colony. Instead, it gave rise to a fully developed Cretan-Mycenaean culture, original, hybrid, and entirely unique within the Aegean world. The icing on the cake, some researchers even suggest that one of the rulers of Crete during this period may have inspired the legendary figure of King Minos. Why not? After all, we know how closely reality and myth can intertwine in ancient traditions. Despite all this, and despite this strong mainland influence, Crete retained its identity. It remained a major power, an active economic center, and above all, a leading artistic hub. So much so that Knossos became one of the greatest centers of artistic production in the Mycenaean world. Its expertise in fresco painting was even adopted by later Mycenaean palaces, particularly in their throne rooms. However, Mycenaean influence continued to grow throughout this period and eventually became dominant. Some Cycladic islands gradually reduced their trade with Crete in favor of the mainland, and even adopted mainland architectural styles. This influence went so far that even major Eastern civilizations such as the Hittites, the famous Anatolian rivals to the Egyptians, whom we will return to in a future episode, began to regard the Mycenaeans with concern. In general, this shift is clearly visible across the Cyclades, particularly on roads, along with the southern coast of Asia Minor and on the island of Samos. A complete change of influence took place. Naturally, at the beginning of the palatial period, a major event no longer surprised anyone: the destruction of the palace of Knossos. Theories range from a Mycenaean ruler seeking control over trade to a revolt by the palace's dependencies. Whatever the cause, it marked a dramatic turning point, accompanied by a deep Mycenaization of Crete, to the point that some sources even describe it as a mainland province. After the destruction of Knossos, the map of Greek mainland began to change. Now, palatial centers emerged, few in number, but significant enough to reshape the organization of power. Their architecture, often relatively uniform, along with their strategic locations, reflects the rise of a new mainland model based on the concentration of authority. These palaces quickly became essential centers. Within them, people administer, make decisions, and organize resources. However, their control was not absolute. Trade, for example, did not pass exclusively through these institutions. Palatial storage facilities remained limited. Some forms of production were modest, and independent merchants continued to operate outside the system. At the same time, not all palaces held equal importance. Mycenae stands out for its monumental character and is often imagined as a major center associated with legendary figures such as Agamemnon. But other sites, such as Thebes, demonstrate comparable levels of power, particularly through the quality of their craftsmanship and the extent of their external relations. In short, it is difficult to identify a single central authority. The palatial world appears instead to be organized around several relatively autonomous centers. This raises an important question. How did these palaces actually function? And by what mechanisms were they able to structure and control their territories? The first answer is that the system appears to have functioned in a fairly traditional way. Despite everything that has been said, power remained highly centralized, and the economy was based on the classic triptych of the period: agriculture, livestock farming, and metallurgy. However, this is only the visible surface of a much more complex system than that of the Minoan world. If we examine the structure of authority in this civilization, it is likely that each Mycenaean kingdom was governed by a dual leadership: a king, the Wanax, and his second in command, the Laugetas. Their exact roles remain somewhat unclear, but they likely combined military and religious functions, without their authority being considered divine, as was the case with the Hittites or the Egyptians. Alongside this, there has also existed a hereditary warrior nobility, remembered in the sources under the name of the Companions, who also resided within the palace itself. royal authority appears to have operated according to a model influenced by the Near East, based on service in exchange for land and agricultural produce. This represented a relatively new form of political organization for the Greek world at the time, and it naturally led to a new way of managing economic activity within the triptych mentioned earlier. Indeed, as noted previously, these activities were only partially under direct palatial control. The palaces therefore had to develop original mechanisms to maintain effective authority. To achieve this, the territory was organized into provinces, which were themselves divided into districts, each centered around a local capital. This structure provided a framework for organizing economic activity and integrating multiple levels of administration. At the top, palatial control was ensured by a complex administration made up of numerous officials. Each palace employed at least 2,000 agents, including scribes. Their role was not limited to writing. They also planned or assisted in planning production, both within the palatial domain and at the local level. All administrative records were sent back to the palace. At the local level, various district officials supported this central structure and fulfilled different functions. Some directly supervised production on behalf of the palace. Others, such as governors and deputy governors, organized taxation and likely managed aspects of daily life through local administrators. Among these officials were specialists responsible for tools and others responsible for figs, which constituted an important part of workers' compensation. At first glance, this system might appear capable of functioning in a simple and autonomous way. However, it is important to emphasize that this bureaucracy was not as developed as in Eastern civilizations. It was too limited to ensure total economic control. Beyond the immediate vicinity of the palaces, its presence weakened and became irregular. This led to the development of two different taxation models, depending on proximity to the palace. For agricultural production and certain other activities, taxation in kind was preferred. Some sources suggest that tax rates could be very high, especially considering that no clear evidence of large palace-owned farms have survived, and that most inhabitants likely had to cultivate their own land or tend livestock. In other cases, a corvée system was used. Individuals contributed labor intermittently, depending on the needs of the palace, either locally for specific agricultural tasks or directly at the palatial center. However, taxation was not the only instrument used to maintain order and cohesion in this unequal society. The palaces also implemented 3 additional mechanisms to maintain control over the countryside. The first was the establishment of a military and religious hierarchy within the districts. On the military level, a companion or another member of the warrior aristocracy could be placed in charge, ensuring security and discipline. The second mechanism involved promoting the leaders of rural communities, known as the damos. These figures held land and legal status. The palaces supported them for 2 main reasons. They acted as intermediaries when installing palace officials in local communities, and they helped manage fiscal and religious affairs, ensuring compliance with palatial regulations. The third mechanism was based on control of specialized activities. Palace archives reveal registers listing professions and their locations, such as bronze workers. The central authority thus exercised indirect but effective control over technical communities, which were supplied with raw materials and mobilized according to political, military, or ritual needs. Overall, the system was highly structured. Yet what is striking is that this sophisticated framework still allowed a remarkable degree of autonomy to many actors. The religious sphere, for example, owned land and generated its own income, even if it remained partially under palatial influence. The military elite, for its part, did not rely solely on royal distribution. Warriors often depended on their own estates or the spoils of their own campaigns. It is this relative autonomy at multiple levels that has led historians to describe Mycenaean society as highly individualistic, in stark contrast to the more centralized and collective structure of the Minoan world. And this individualism did not stop at local elites or rural communities. It extended even to the highest levels of the state. The Wanaks, the king, and the Lauagetas, his second in command, both possessed their own lands and production facilities. But what ultimately was the purpose of all of this organization? Of course, we could mention production, trade, or the organization of ceremonial feasts and banquets. But for the Mycenaeans, there was something more, something that truly animated their culture and structured all these systems. Their primary activity? War. War was a normal part of this civilization, an economic activity like any other. It took the form of small-scale conflicts, raids, alliances, mercenary warfare, and of course, military expeditions. Historian Claude Moss notes that it was thanks to the organization of the Mycenaean palatial system that kings were able to mobilize the resources necessary to maintain their fleets. However, in concrete terms, it remains unclear whether naval battles actually took place during this period, or whether siege warfare using poliorcetics, the art of military siegecraft, was widely practiced. In general, researchers such as François Baslez considered that the entire system was fundamentally oriented toward warfare. Compared to Crete, where palaces had almost no defensive structures, Mycenaean palaces were truly fortified citadels, protected by massive cyclopean walls. At certain sites, such as Pylos, evidence of a real military organization has been discovered, including the maintenance of chariots, a system also found among the Hittites and the Egyptians. In addition, fortresses were constructed, troops were mobilized, and a strategic road network was developed. And yet there is no clearly identified external enemy threatening the Mycenaeans during this period. This suggests that warfare was primarily internal, taking place between rival kingdoms. Furthermore, several archaeological sites show clear traces of destruction followed by reconstruction, likely evidence of repeated local conflicts. Even the art of this period reflects this warlike atmosphere. Rather than large epic battles, we see depictions of duels, raised weapons, scenes of violence, hunting, and military dominance, all emphasizing strength and power. The economy was deeply embedded in this climate of warfare. Slavery, for example, most likely developed through prisoners of war. In fact, some historians, slaves may have represented one of the greatest sources of wealth in Mycenaean society. This is why war occupied such a central place. Thus, warfare stood at the very heart of this civilization, but it did not define it entirely. It also flourished through other dimensions that contributed just as much to its material reputation. The prosperity of this civilization is clearly visible at multiple levels. First, within the palaces themselves. Architectural innovations such as monolithic thresholds began to appear. These were massive stone blocks carved from a single piece of rock, used as monumental entrances that conveyed power and authority. At the same time, chamber tombs developed for the dead, burials cut into the rock or constructed with an internal funerary chamber accessible through a corridor. This funerary model spread widely during this period, even being adopted by the Minoans themselves, marking a clear departure from their earlier tradition of collective tombs. However, this material prosperity was not limited to architecture alone. In terms of territory, the Mycenaeans also brought about a profound transformation. It is likely that much of the mainland was now occupied, reshaping the landscape on a large scale. Hillsides were turned into agricultural terraces adapted to local conditions. Dams and irrigation canals were constructed. A real effort to control nature emerged, closely linked with technical progress, combining material development with military organization through the construction of fortified sites. At the human level, and in terms of craftsmanship, this system reveals the emergence of a new level of specialization, with certain professions becoming hereditary, such as that of the metalsmith. This reflects a society in motion, one that is open to change and transformation. But this development was not only material. We also observe a spiritual renewal in religious practice. This is partly visible in the appearance of small temples, structures that are also found in the Cycladic world. These buildings reveal distinctive features. For example, the presence of benches suggests that food may have played a new role in religious rituals. Their locations also raise questions. Some temples are found outside settlements, while others, such as at Mycenaeans, are located within palatial enclosures. This may also shed light on the role of religion within the megaron, the great throne room of the palace, which some researchers believe may have had a broader ceremonial or cultural function, but this remains a debated issue. As for religious personnel, the sanctuary of Spagan, the best documented site, reveals a certain continuity with the Minoan world. Women still held important roles here, even if male presence appears to have become more dominant in other sanctuaries, reflecting the increasingly masculine structure of Mycenaean palatial society. This could also explain the exceptional character of Spagan, and perhaps the presence of the main goddess, Potnia, the mistress. Speaking of deities, what these sanctuaries reveal for the first time in the sources is the presence of several major figures of the later Greek pantheon: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, and even quite surprisingly, Dionysus, who one might have expected to appear only later. Of course, we should be careful. At this stage, these gods are known only by name, and it is not certain that they already corresponded exactly to the later classical divinities. But what is striking is that they already form part of a religious framework that would endure for millennia within European culture. This is how the greatness of the Mycenaean civilization is expressed, both in its technical achievements and in its cultural and symbolic structures. But ultimately, one question remains. What impact did this have beyond its borders, apart from war and conflict? In any case, it was not an imperial system in the later sense, such as that which would emerge centuries later with Athens. So at this point, things are fairly clear. In their relationship with the wider world, the Mycenaeans exported their political and cultural model only to a limited extent. Even in their so-called trading posts, their establishment among local populations often took a violent or conflictual form. It is above all through commerce that the power of the palaces becomes most effective, allowing their network of contacts to expand across a vast area. From Sardinia to the eastern Mediterranean, including Asia Minor, Cyprus, Egypt, southern Italy, Sicily, and the Balkans, Mycenaean ceramic production, textiles, and agricultural goods circulated widely. In this sense, we can say that they surpassed the Minoans, whose earlier trade networks they had largely taken over. However, it is also believed that part of this circulation was carried out not directly by Mycenaean ships, but by Eastern intermediaries, predecessors of the later Phoenician navigators. This does not mean that the Mycenaeans were not seafarers. Mythology preserves clear traces of their maritime activity, such as the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, or the voyages of Heracles. But for long-distance trade, they often relied on intermediaries, who in turn relied on others. One key hub in this network is the island of Cyprus, where Proto-Phoenician groups could collect Greek goods. Cyprus, known in some sources as the Kingdom of Alatia, is essential for understanding the expansion of the Mycenaean network. With its various principalities and quasi-palatial structures, the Cypriot world played a major role in Mediterranean trade, often acting as an intermediary within Mycenaean exchange systems. The Cypriots even produced ceramics marked with distinctive local symbols. They were highly skilled craftsmen, and may even have been present as merchants within regions such as the Argolid. And they were not the only intermediaries. They were also buyers. One theory suggests that Mycenaeans adapted the style of their ceramics to better match the tastes and expectations of their trading partners. In any case, other civilizations were not indifferent to Mycenaean influence. In Cyprus, the Levant, and even the Italic region, their artistic style inspired local productions. This is all the more significant because during this period it was not only goods that circulated, but also people, leading to the formation of small communities. The diplomatic aspect of Mycenaean relations is well documented and appears far less successful. There were attempts, particularly with the Hittite and Egyptian civilizations. In the case of Egypt, it is thought that earlier contacts with Crete may have served as a basis. However, nothing long-lasting seems to have been established, even in some scholars point to possible diplomatic exchanges, such as embassies sent to Amenhotep III during campaigns in Syria, or artifacts bearing his name found in Mycenaean contacts. In practice, the Egyptians appear to have viewed the Mycenaeans primarily as traders, importing raw materials such as glass and ivory, and exporting luxury goods from the palaces, including small perfume vessels and textile products. In other cases, they may have been employed as mercenaries, as suggested by certain papyri. For the Hittites, the Mycenaeans appear as unreliable partners, problematic in some contexts, and even disruptive due to their incursions into Anatolia. Figures such as Atarisia, associated with Ahiawa, and their support for enemies of the Hittite Empire, such as the king of Arzawa, and other regional opponents, reinforce this image of a destabilizing force. Thus, the growing Mycenaean presence in Anatolia also reflects the image of an elusive and difficult-to-control actor. This period therefore marks an initial cultural unification of the Greek world under palatial authority, making these kingdoms stronger and more ambitious than ever, and enabling the development of a powerful, warrior-based civilization. Nothing seemed capable of stopping them. But at the beginning of the 12th century BCE, the unthinkable happened. A chain of disasters struck one after another, leading to the collapse of Greek civilization, as well as many surrounding cultures. This rich and interconnected world collapsed into what would later be called the Dark Ages, leaving almost no written records behind, and confronting the Greeks with a second major catastrophe in their history, the collapse of the Bronze Age.